Today is the 253rd anniversary of the Boston Massacre, and as I said, it happened right outside the window. This was a big public square back in 1770. The massacre happened out there on the night of March 5th, 1770. And I just want to start by setting the scene. March 5th was a cold but also clear night with the moon in the sky here in Boston. It was a good opportunity for people to step out of their smoky homes, right? Everybody's heating their homes with wood fires, get some fresh air, be out on the streets. A lot of people did come to gather in this space. The square out here in the shadow of the townhouse was one of the primary public gathering places in Boston. And here on the square on the far side was the Customs House. In the Customs House was a single redcoat standing guard over the Customs House. There was a lot of customs duties that were stored in there, coin, specie. His name was Private Hugh White. He was part of a large detachment of the King's soldiers that had been in Boston now for almost a year and a half. They came in October of 1768 at the request of the royal governor. They came in order to quell protest in a town that was seen as increasingly ungovernable. At the peak of their occupation, the number of soldiers in town rose as high as 4,000 people. That's in a town that had somewhere between 15 and 16,000 residents. So imagine there's one soldier in town for every 4 residents of Boston. As you can imagine, rather than calming things down, the presence of that large force actually did exactly the opposite. It created friction, created unhappiness. There were lots of opportunities for people to come to blows with each other. Anger and frustration grows. And it's really at a breaking point by the time we get to March of 1770. And on that night, March 5th, 1770, it boils over. It begins because Hugh White is over there and there's an apprentice in the square. They come to first to an exchange of insults with each other, and finally to a little bit of a fracas, shoving each other. And there's observers who gather. They begin to shout insults and scold Hugh White. Pretty soon the town bells are ringing. We think maybe the bell up in the townhouse was the first one to toll, but all of the churches in this area soon are tolling their bells. That calls people out into the streets. The numbers grow. Soon we have several hundred people surrounding this one beleaguered sentry. Soon a detachment of about 9 soldiers, grenadiers, are brought out of the guardhouse nearby here in order to protect, hopefully to relieve and retrieve Hugh White. They form a defensive semicircle in front of him, bayonets attached, muskets loaded, but that doesn't really stop the crowd. Why not? Because everybody in Boston knows that soldiers can't discharge their weapons on a civilian crowd until something happens, and that is an official of the town first has to come forward and read the riot act. Literally, there was a riot act. Somebody, a civilian official, had to declare the assembly unlawful and ordered the crowd to disperse before military weapons could be discharged in order to effect that order if people aren't doing it. Nobody thinks that's going to happen in Boston. So the crowd simply continues the work of pressing forward, pushing up against the soldiers. The square, right, it's late winter in Boston. There's melted and then refrozen snow. There's hardened piles of horse poop. There's oyster shells around. People start hurling things at soldiers, and then a detachment of sailors push in from the side of the crowd, make their way right up to the front, and begin to really shove against the soldiers' defensive formation, grabbing their muskets, and then one weapon is discharged. There's a brief pause, and all the rest of them go, right? 11 people are injured. There is a sudden silence that falls over the crowd. 3 people lie dead on the cobbles. 2 others have suffered mortal wounds and will die within a very short period of time. One of them is a 17-year-old apprentice. the blow to the town is quite extraordinary. So we normally tell the story of the Boston Massacre because it's an important milestone on the road to revolution, right? It is a turning point, without question. It turns the many colonists in town who had once taken great pride in their identity as British subjects into folks who are now committed to the cause. And ultimately it sets the conditions for that rupture that will be first the American Revolution and ultimately the founding of a newly independent United States. So it is without question an important part of the political story of the time. But what today's program is looking past just the political dimensions of the story and asking ourselves what the human dimensions of that event were, right? Today's program is about the trauma and loss that flow from political violence. And we can look at many different places and times where that kind of political violence happens. We're really blessed to have with us today 4 individuals, poets and storytellers and historians, who are bravely willing to share their own experiences as individuals or as members of a community, their own experiences with violence, and tell us a little bit about the pain of loss, about the challenges that come with navigating that dislocating experience of suddenly being in a world that is different from the one you lived in yesterday because it has been shattered by unexpected violence perpetrated by the state. So what I hope you'll do is think not just about this history, but think about how the history can help us to understand more recent experiences, and also think about how that personal testimony you're going to hear can help us see this history in a different light. If we look past the political story, we can see that Bostonians, too, were on that journey of navigating the personal sense of loss, the trauma, right? Boston, town of 15,000, everybody knew someone who was in the square that night. Many people knew somebody who lost their lives on that night. And I think there's an opportunity in looking at how Boston navigated the aftermath of the Boston Massacre to understand the role that memory plays in transforming the experience of pain and loss into a sense of purpose, whether that's your own purpose as an individual, a sense of shared purpose within a family or a community, or even a sense of purpose that's sustained across generations as the story of that loss is passed from one generation to the next. Here in Boston, the town gathered every year on the anniversary of the Boston Massacre. As much as 1/3 of the town would come together in order to hear an oration remembering the victims and asking the audience to be true to the cause in order to ensure that those folks had not lost their lives in vain. I just want to read to you a passage from probably the most powerful of those orations, which was delivered by Joseph Warren, later to be killed in the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775. But in March of 1775, he delivered at Old South Meeting House an oration in which he came at that subject of loss head on. "Approach we then the melancholy walk of death," he told the audience. "Hither let me call the gay companion. Here let him drop a farewell tear upon that body which so late he saw vigorous and warm wish with social mirth." It's 5 years after the massacre. Everybody still has a clear memory in their minds of what happened that night, whether they saw it themselves or somebody recounted it to them. And he's taking his audience right there, right? "Come, widowed mourner, here satiate thy grief. Behold thy murdered husband gasping on the ground, and to complete the show of wretchedness, bring in each hand thy infant children to bewail their father's fate. Take heed, ye orphan babes, lest whilst your streaming eyes are fixed upon the ghastly corpse, your feet glide on the stones bespattered with your father's brains." Right? He is living the pain of that night and asking his audience to do that as well. He's not running from it. But what happens next is important. Enough, he says. That's enough. And then he implored the crowd not to succumb only to pain and grief, but to fashion it into a commitment to the cause so that those who died would not have died in vain. On you, he said, rest the fortunes of America. And of course, we know how that story ended. It is so hard across 250 years ago to remember that these figures who live in our national history as kind of mythic figures were human beings. But I think it's really critical that we do that. They share the human experience of passing through this kind of political violence, perpetrated in this case at the hands of the state, and had to figure out how to do something with it, how to make sense of it, and how to turn it into something that would allow them to survive in a world that had been fundamentally transformed.
I am a second-generation Cambodian American, which means that I am the daughter of refugees and very proud daughter of refugees, actually. My parents survived the Cambodian genocide that happened in the 1970s, and here I am today able to tell my family's story. So without further ado, I will just get started. Sometimes we forget about the children born to the ones who survived, the children born to the ones who escaped, who cowered, who hid, the children like me with American names who celebrate with fireworks. You know, those panic-inducing big bang bomb sounds filling the sky, those trigger children with the side of laughter. I'll be the first to admit the shock. Me, the daughter of refugees, who bestowed the honor, this heavy gift of life, this cohort, the first generation born on colonizer soil. We don't talk about the children like me. So, how do I explain that my trauma was instilled in me the day my mother planted me into her womb? That DNA is nothing short of a miracle and a curse. My mother grew me like a half-split seed. A little wishful thinking and water would do me good. Some food, a roof over my head, but no heat in the winter. No parents to tuck me into bed. Better yet, no parents ever, because our parents lived at the factories that employed them. Because our parents didn't understand children with hobbies, with comforts, and no stolen innocence. What a luxury it has become to be able to just live, to breathe. But we don't ever talk about the children like me, who are born to the children raised by wolves, because we aren't done talking about those children and the sound of their howls. My story is not complete without telling my mother's. It is so important to remember that my mother was just a child too, in all parts of her story. The first set of bombs dropped in 1973. Cambodia never experienced snow, barely any rain, yet it held bombs like no one had ever seen. I imagine the citizens dancing, laughing, singing, Cambodian crooners learning the lingo, the lyrics, and the beat. It was the era of rock bands, mini dresses, short hair, guitar amps turned to high, but the vibration of bombs was not part of the act. When the drumming of bombs graced their ears, the set list changed forever. 1975, in the center of Cambodia. My mother stands outside in her school uniform, greeted by the family chauffeur. She was the 11th and last daughter to a prosperous bloodline. Her father, a government employee. Her mother, a homemaker. She was 10 when the first set of bombs dropped, but she was 12 when she witnessed the communists murder her father. That day, she didn't only lose her father, she lost everyone, everything she ever called home. The Khmer Rouge split up the family and assigned them to different concentration camps. My mother was a city girl who landed in the countryside by force. She was in a camp with other children. They were forced to pick apples. A mere child, hands the size of the smallest crop, a stomach whose name was now starvation. My mother drooled at the sight of a bruised apple. Looking in all directions, she decided the coast was clear. Quietly, my hungry mouse of a mother took a bite. The scene was set for an explosion of a backhanded slap. The communist soldier took my mother by her ringing ear and dragged her throughout the village, set an example out of her like a mouse on a trap, slowly dying, fearfully shrieking, "My poor mother, just a girl." She lost everything in the war. That was the day she lost herself too. So she made it a mission to escape to anywhere, anywhere at all, anywhere safe, a new place to call home with new people who feel like home. In the concentration camp, she meets a young farmer boy. He is my father. One night, under a full moon, hallelujah, they run, two kids, hand in hand, racing until they cross the finish line. Their victory can be seen in slides. First slide, the Thailand border. Second slide, a plane ride to Chicago. Third slide, a church, a high school, two McDonald's employees. Fourth slide, a couple of refugees playing in the snow for the first time. Because like I said, Cambodia never experienced any snow. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. I'm here to evoke with you how in the year 1803, Haiti's revolution embodied Crispus Attucks, his bold anti-colonial move of March 1770. Now, if you are here, I'm going to tell you, please feel free to join me in this narration at some point if you feel the spirit. Now, our history books and common search engines are populated with references to a Haitian revolution. I am here to retell the history of a certain massacre in Haiti, because for too long, Haiti's story and history has been told from the perspectives of those whose colonialist projects and misdeeds ended in infamy. Now, I'm also a Haitian citizen. I'm from Haiti. And I'm standing near this site where 5 men were massacred, I understand, right out here on March 5th, 1770, sparking one of the most remarkable events in the history of the world, the American Revolution. Now, one of those men was a black man, Crispus Attucks, and a single act that he posed was going to change the course of history. Let's refer back to archives materials because there was a trial. And one of the witnesses, Andrew, testified. Attucks, the stout man, stepped into the fray and swung his stick at British Captain Thomas Preston, then knocked away a soldier and hit in the face and the head. Attucks grabbed the soldier's bayonet in his old hand and then yelled to the crowd, kill the dog, knock them down. Just a moment before, the soldier regained control of his gun and shot him. Now, when I learned about Crispus Attucks' move, a wave of emotion took me from here and transported me onto the shores of Haiti in the year 1803. So travel back with me, my friend. 11 years after Attucks' death, this is exactly what formerly enslaved African men who had dared to be free would do for 13 years in Haiti. Grab their gun and fight them. To French General Leclerc, who was asking Haitian liberator Toussaint Louverture in 1803 during a truce. But dites-moi comment, Général Toussaint, si vous aviez l'intention de vous battre, où alliez-vous trouver les armes? Tell me, General Toussaint, if you intended to fight our French troops, where would you have found weapons? Toussaint looked at General Leclerc with a shy smile and replied, General Leclerc, we would have gotten the guns from you, from your troops. And this is how, my friend, we start to connect with Crispus Attucks. In the year 1802, more than 300,000 men, women, and children who have tasted the taste of freedom, who have fought for years, wars to defeat the British troops in 1798, the Spanish troops in 1794, and the French troops throughout the whole decade. Since 1793, those Haitians have proclaimed for the first time in the face of the earth the abolition of slavery in Haiti. So an irate Napoleon Bonaparte, who had defeated the most powerful European armies in Europe on earth, had vowed to crush the defiance of the black of Saint-Domingue, then the name of Haiti. Now, his dreams of grandeur, his dreams of conquest were going to collide with the dreams of freedom of the blacks of Haiti. We are talking again about 300,000 men, women, and children who had broken their chains, who have broken their shackles, and vowed never to return to this state of slavery. Now, these are the warriors against whom Napoleon Bonaparte was going to send the largest armada back then in the history of the world to reestablish slavery. 40,000 troops under the command of General Rochambeau, of General Leclerc. But fear had for long vanished from the heart of these men. They battled in Cap-Haïtien. They fought guerrilla war, Dahomey style, in the mountains of the north. In March 1802, 900 of them escaped the 12,000 French troops that were sent to surround them and to massacre them. All the while, what they've been doing is exactly what Crispus Attucks had done. Seize the enemy's weapon and fight, and fight, and fight. Whether they lived, whether they die. Whether they live, whether they die. Whether they live, whether they die. It was then that General Leclerc decided that a massacre was in order. A prolonged, protracted massacre involving an entire class of men, black women. So once again, let's go to historical archives to find a desperate letter that General Leclerc sent to Napoléon Bonaparte. Nous devons détruire tous ces noirs des montagnes, femmes et hommes. We must destroy all the blacks of the mountains, men and women, and spare only children under the age of 12 years of age. We must destroy half of those in the plain, and must not leave a single colored person in the colony who had worn an epaulette or a bayonet. Understand now, the scale of the inhuman slavery project in Haiti could no longer accommodate the term, the concept of massacre. We are now talking about a full-blown extermination of an entire race on the island of Saint-Domingue. Now, again, historical archives. Let's go to the formidable Henri Christophe, future king of Haiti, in a letter that was set about the French officers' treatment of the blacks in the colony. Have they not hung up men with heads downward, drawn them in sacks, crucified them on planks, buried them alive, crushed them in mortars? Have they not thrown them into boiling cauldron of cane syrup? Have they not put them, men and women, inside barrels studded with spikes and rolled them down mountainsides into the abyss? Have they not consigned these miserable blacks to man-eating dogs until the latter, sated by human flesh, left the mangled victims to be finished off by bayonets and daggers? The unprecedented scale of the massacre cannot be confined to a 1 day, to a 1 week, to a 1 month event. No, no. It went on for the entire summer and fall of 1802. General Leclerc, supreme envoy of the nation that had declared in 1789, liberté, égalité, fraternité, tous les hommes naissent et demeurent égaux. Liberty, equality, fraternity, all men are created equal. Here is General Leclerc ordering daily mass executions of men, women, children by firing squads, public hanging, drowning in the Bay of Cap-Haïtien. Here they are, General Leclerc, General Rochambeau, presiding over public carnage, poor starved dogs, trained to ferocity and forced to devour black flesh, to devour hearts from chest, to pull bloody bowels out of bellies and rip limbs out of bodies. Men were lined up, tied up to poles, and French squads, thrilled with anticipation, were firing at will. Soldat, on joue, feu! Soldier, ready, aim, fire! Soldat, on joue, feu! Soldier, ready, aim, fire! Brutalized, pierced, black bodies turned into bloody leaking fountains. They became mangled masses of broken bones and flesh leapt into the dust. Yet, out of their last breath, one could still hear their lips whispering these persisting words: Liberté ou la mort, liberté ou la mort, freedom or death. Freedom or death, until they pass, until they expire. Yet, from the mountains, new bodies, male and female, flocking down in trove to fight for freedom, to die for freedom, to fight for freedom, to die for freedom, to fight for freedom, to die for freedom. The use of man-eating dogs was a new, yet horrific dimension of the massacres. In March 1803, excited crowds of French colonists awaited with flowers in the streets of Cap Haitian to celebrate the arrival of 300 Cuban dogs trained to eat black flesh, hoping that the ferocity of the dogs would instill terror, break the warriors' will, get them to give up. Officer Touvenot had predicted, and I quote, les chiens vont tellement terroriser ces noirs qu'ils vont abandonner la lutte et se rendre sans espoir. The dogs will so terrorize the rebels that without any hope of escaping, they will surrender to us at will. But no bullets, no drownings, no ferocious dogs dispatched against the warriors would kill the spirit of freedom. No, no, no! Such spirit, such dream doesn't die, can be killed. The spirit can be crushed. So Haiti proclaimed its independence with General Dessalines on January 1st, 1804, the second republic in the Western Hemisphere after the United States. Dessalines has accomplished in a way Crispus Attucks' bold move. Dessalines assumed in a proclamation to the America in June 1804, and I quote, "We have dared to be free. Let us dare to be so by ourselves and for ourselves. Yes, we've rendered to these true cannibals war for war, outrage for outrage, blow for blow. Yes, I've saved my country. I have avenged America. So my friends, if anything, Crispus Attucks shared the same mindset that inspired Haitian warriors in 1790s. The same mindset that inspired Frederick Douglass in the 1850s. The same mindset that inspired Martin Luther King and Malcolm X in the 1960s. If anything, in this historical old state house that became the first space where British tyranny started to crumble and where the Act of Independence was proclaimed in Boston, Haiti also, the site of many horrific massacres, became the first space in the world where colonialism, racism, slavery started to crumble, and the site where the independence of the first Black Republic was proclaimed on the face of the earth on January 1st, 1804. Thank you.
As you guys have heard, my name is John Yang. My name is not only my calling, but it also recalls a history full of political violence. It is not a coincidence that I am a first generation Hmong American. Hmong people are without a country. For hundreds of years, they have fought and resisted numerous violent attempts at cultural indoctrination by the many forms of Chinese governments that came to power. To survive death and genocide, Hmong people continuously moved and migrated. My parents are from Laos, a country located on the Southeast Asian peninsula where many Hmong people were able to settle. In the late 1960s, the North Vietnamese government decided to go to war with its southern counterpart and unite the nation under communist rule. The U.S. chose to be part of this historical transition of political power in Vietnam. To Americans, this became known as the Vietnam War. During the Vietnam War, Laos played an essential role in the North Vietnamese Army's ability to transport supplies from North Vietnam to their soldiers in South Vietnam. This created a problem for the U.S. Army because Laos was not a country involved in the war. To mask their presence in Laos, the U.S. began recruiting Hmong people to fight for them as their front men. Because of the internal strife Hmong people already had with local Laotians over resources, this made it easy for the U.S.'s CIA to enlist Hmong people with the promise that if the Americans won the war, then Hmong people can live in peace because democracy will be the political power to free them from their struggles of belonging and resource equality. America did not win the war, and Hmong people never got their peace. Instead, the U.S. pulled out of the war and left Hmong people to face genocide from the Lao Communist government, who had condemned Hmong people as traitors of the land and as enemies of the state. More than 30 to 40,000 Hmong people died fighting for the U.S., believing they will one day have an equal right to resources to sustain a simple, bearable life without the hardship of political persecution. Hmong people again moved and migrated to survive. In 1981, I was born in Providence, Rhode Island. My parents, displaced from a place they once called home, individually found their own path to the United States of America and found companionship with each other. They struggled to find success in a foreign land that they knew nothing about. I hardly recall Providence. My most earliest memories are of a place named Appleton in Wisconsin. The tales of how my parents made the transition to the Midwest from the East Coast is now something of a myth. as the stories have been told over and over with slight changes. One thing is sure, it was because my parents had more family there, and again, searching for belonging and resources, they moved. Fast forward to 1989, my family has moved back to Massachusetts. Funny that I would be living in a city called Fitchburg right next to Leominster. Why is this important? Because as a child in the Midwest, my cousins and friends had called me Johnny Appleseed. And yes, I come to find out, he himself was birthed in Leominster. As I grew older, I noticed differences in how I looked and how I was looked at by others. Kids that I went to school with made fun of my shoes and asked why my eyes looked different. By the time I was 11, I became aware that my family fell into this category of what people called a low-income household. We lived in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, but the neighborhood we lived in told us we were poor. I didn't grow up in a country in the jungles fighting a war, but I heard gunshots every night and knew not to walk alone at night. At age 14, I was incarcerated for the first time. Not arrested, but locked up in a juvenile detention for discharging a firearm within 500 feet of a dwelling. Or at least that's what the other kid told the police. Searching for my own belonging and resources, I had become part of the criminal ecosystem that existed in my own neighborhood. I was a great student. I was on the honor roll. But this did not help. All they saw was a problematic child and not the designs of policies that hindered my development. That one criminal charge banned me from attending any school within the district. I would continue down this path of incarceration for 20 years. In 2015, I was convicted of a crime I didn't commit because of the lack of resources and a judicial system built on the basis of white supremacy that left me unable to defend myself properly in court. I was convicted because one of the 3 white men who were caught right after committing the crime picked me after the police had showed him my picture twice. He was 80% sure I was the Chinese guy that told him to commit the crime. I was given a 16 to 18-year prison sentence, while those 3 white men received 4 years probation to be served out on the streets. While incarcerated, I found EPI, Emerson's Prison Initiative, a college behind bars program. During the time I was attending that program at MCI Concord, I continued to fight my case, and in 2020, I was granted a chance to bring my case back to court and have a retrial due to errors made by the judge and district attorney in allowing evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to be the reason for my conviction. 80% is not beyond a reasonable doubt. Later that year, a day after Thanksgiving, I was free in a sense that I was no longer incarcerated. But it was not until October of 2021 that my case would finally be over. 2023. I am now attending Emerson College here in Boston, having to still move and migrate to escape the political violence of lacking resources. Except now, I am educating myself on how to better access resources to improve the livelihoods of at-risk youths in low-income communities by giving them greater access to opportunities of achieving higher learning through connecting them with progressive development programs and grant availability. Thank you. But just to go a little bit further, here's some visuals of what Hmong people had gone through during the Vietnam War. So as the Americans struggled with fighting in the jungles because they were not used to the atmosphere and environment, they recruited Hmong people to help fallen American soldiers, hence giving up their lives to save American lives. I just want to show this picture of the relationship between Hmong people and American soldiers, and I just want to say that the perpetuation of this kind of relationship should exist here in this country. And then here is the leader at the time of the Hmong army, General Vang Pao, being given the power to call an airstrike on what they believed was a communist party that had infiltrated the area. And then this is a picture of Hmong people pleading for their lives after the U.S. had pulled out and they no longer had the resources to continue fighting and therefore were captured by the communist government. So.
And what happened to most of them? Education camps, re-education camps, or execution?
Execution, majority of them, yeah. So. It just goes to say how far human beings suffer at the hands of political power and political violence, especially in the transition of what those in power believe is right. So, thank you guys. Thank you guys for coming.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Jimmy Hills. I'm the host of what I call vlogcast called Java with Jimmy. And I met or became familiar with Boston's, Black Boston's rich history at an event at the other location a few months ago. In the context of the anniversary of the Boston Massacre 252 years ago, in comparison to today, I want to bring the perspective of political violence to my story and today. I come from a teenage mom who came from a mother who died not long after having my mother. The question around political violence has to be asked, what was the systemic structures and systems in place around women of color in healthcare back then? To speed things up a little bit, being a son of a teenage mother, that comes with some level of presumptions. My father was not involved. That was in rich Roxbury, which now is being faced with a lot of gentrification, again, political violence. There were systems and structures in place in reference to my grandmother and also when my mother had me as a teenager. Some years after that, my mother succumbed to crack. Another, if we look at systems and structures, recent legislation around powdered cocaine versus crack, the presumption of white users versus black and brown users, again, political violence through policy. Poverty is a big part of that political violence that happens still to today. With all of that being said, and I've mentioned to some folks here that one of the things that combats political violence in my community and for me is being very intentional about Black joy. Let me first clarify for everyone, Black joy is not confined just to Black people. You all are here today to hear, in this particular case, you're hearing stories about a Black man's experience, but hopefully you're able to walk away to, despite everything that I've shared about the impact of political violence on my life, I would like to share a positive perspective out of all the years of being back up a little bit about me. Again, my mom, born to a teenage mom. We were in the Bromley Heath housing projects. That's where I was raised. Again, my mother had succumbed to crack. I am a Black gay man that grew up in the projects in a Pentecostal church. So I heard a few hmms and hahs, so you all know. For those of you that don't know what that means, in a traditional Christian upbringing, homosexuality is a sin. I wasn't the most masculine thing, so the guys were like, hey, you know, the F word. And, you know, I was the oldest, and so I also had the responsibility of raising my sisters. I learned how to braid hair. That didn't help, you know, the other stuff. And so, you know, I am still, till this day, a double Dutch jumper. If they had the rope here right now, I would show you. I can still do it. But I wanted to be intentional about naming the impact, naming my history, but also naming Black joy, and it not being confined just to Black people, but in your daily lives, wanting to encourage you to, there's this wonderful word around allyship. It's being used so casually and it's become a trend, but really where there are allies, there has to be intentionality. Someone makes a snarky remark about a black person, brown person, someone that speaks a different language, of a different sexual orientation. You all are leaving here today deputized with the responsibility of saying, hey, let's not perpetuate more political violence on those that are impacted, again, by systems and structures that were not, let's be honest, were not originally designed for people that look like me to succeed. A lot of things have changed since 2020. Someone named for me what was the monumental event that happened in 2020. Anyone? George Floyd, absolutely. And it put a lot of opportunity out there for policy legislation, police reform, qualified immunity, and whether you have a difference of, whichever your opinion is about it. One of the things that is so interesting about our country is when we have tragedies like that, we get a little further in policy. When we have tragedies like Tyree Nichols, and as Tip O'Neill used to say, all politics are local. How many of you recognize the name Tyler Lawrence? A little bit. Tyler Lawrence is the 13-year-old young man that was killed in Boston about 6 or so weeks ago. And so on that national and local level, when we talk about political violence, we have to also name the fact that these policies demonstrate themselves through poverty as well. And poverty has an impact on urban violence and things like that. And so I bring that up because going back to your daily, everyday conversation, when you hear about these stories or narratives in the media that perpetuate a certain narrative around folks that look like me, speak up in your authenticity where you are comfortable, because that is one of the #1 ways that we can begin to dissipate political violence, specifically speaking in reference to my demographic, which is Black and brown folks. Anyone have any questions, any comments? I'm open. I believe in organic presentation. Anyone? You seem like the youngest one here. Can I bother you? Okay. What is your impression of, or give me one word for political violence from your perspective?
Change maker.
So she got away with 2. Change maker. So tell me why you said political violence, change maker, while you're standing right by the sign that says. Do we love that affirmation?
Yeah.
So when I say political violence and you say change maker, what made you say change maker?
I think that it can lead to change within a society.
Yes.
However, it also doesn't. I'm actually from Minneapolis, and I was there for George Floyd. So, in my experience of what happened in the aftermath of that,
Yes.
I don't think that there was enough done in Minneapolis within the police force itself.
Yep.
There's a lot of red tape that goes along with it, unfortunately, but I think the justice system did what it should have done, but there was a lot more change that could have been done as well.
Thank you. What's your name?
Delaney,
And if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
26.
Okay. I mean, no disrespect. You look very, very teeny. Okay. But thank you. Thank you so much. I really wanted to have sort of that level of interaction and engagement. And I just want to name for you that there's just, when you mentioned you were in Minneapolis, that just had a different spark within me to be there and see everything in the aftermath that happened. But I thank you for naming it. In one of the signs here, it talks about these big tragedies and horrific incidents that do set a stage for change, but there's so much more that we can do.